The first black leader in Europe has taken office in Wales. In fact, 3 of the 4 nations in the UK now have ethnic minority heads of government. So, what does that say about the people and the politics of the United Kingdom? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the First Ministers of Wales and Scotland, the Mayor of London and the British Prime Minister all come from non-white backgrounds. This would have been unthinkable only a few decades ago. So what has changed in British society and how has it affected race relations?
This is more than a normal swearing-in ceremony.
As First Minister,
it is a first for Europe.
Wales becomes the first nation anywhere in Europe to be led by a black person. It is a matter of pride, I believe, for a modern Wales, but also a daunting responsibility for me, and one that I do not take lightly.
Born in Zambia to a Welsh father and Zambian mother, Gething moved to Wales when he was 2. He joins a list of UK leaders who come from minority backgrounds, including the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf, though interestingly, they all represent different political parties. But looking at all members of Parliament, 66 are from non-white backgrounds. That's about 10% of Westminster, and this isn't keeping up with 18% of the English and Welsh population that identifies as black or Asian. Despite this progress, racism is on the rise. The most recent figures show nearly 110,000 race hate crimes were recorded in the year to March 2022. That's a 19% increase from a year earlier. While Vaughan Gething's election is a step in the right direction, the road to equality is not a straight line. And while representation doesn't necessarily diminish racism, it does matter.
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Manchester is UK Labour Party MP Afzal Khan. In the studio here with me, we have Jasper. He's a human rights activist and former senior policy advisor on equalities to the former London Mayor Ken Livingstone. Halima Khan is the former chair of Labour Party's Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Staff Network. And Shabnam Nasimi is the founder and director of Conservative Friends for Afghanistan. It's a political, business and diplomatic forum. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Afzal, I'll come to you first. This is something that the UK should be rightly proud of, that we're seeing such leadership coming from minority communities.
Absolutely, you're spot on. I think if you look around currently, then you can see all over the place the BME leadership visibly being present there, starting right at the top with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. There are a number of people who are also in his cabinet. Then you've got the shadow side of the shadow cabinet. There are people there as well. And then you move out of the main government. Then you'll see again London, Sadiq Khan, a number of times he's been elected, and fingers crossed, I have no doubt he'll be elected again. And then Scotland, you've got as well. Wales, you've got it as well. So they're there. And then going down to the grassroots level, I think there are hundreds and hundreds of people up and down the country who represent at the local government level as well.
Shabnam, 10% of elected reps in the UK are now non-white. There's still quite a bit of work to go, though, isn't there? Because the overall population is 18% who would identify as non-white. So we're making progress, but it's slow.
Absolutely, but having said that, in the UK, 1 in 5 are from ethnic minorities in comparison to the white population. And if you compare that to France, which is the ratio is 1 to 10, and in Germany, they don't even collect data based on race and ethnicity because they believe that collecting data on ethnic groups will counter equality agendas and policies. Having said that, the UK is a very, very highly diverse population, and that is due to its historic immigration after World War II from the Commonwealth countries and beyond. There has been a very strong push over the last decade or so for a stronger inclusivity and representation from ethnic minority backgrounds in the UK, and that's coming from a broader societal recognition of the importance of ethnic minority communities in leadership roles, particularly around ensuring that policies are representative and needs are being met. So, I mean, I come from a refugee background myself. I'm originally from Afghanistan. My family came to the UK in 1999, and seeing that someone like Vaughan Gething, who is of Zambian origin, he was born in Zambia, being able to become the First Minister of Wales is something that I would say I'm very proud of as a British citizen. We are definitely, there's a lot of improvements to be made, but I think we need to acknowledge our wins as well.
Halima, how difficult has the journey been, do you think, for elected representatives from minority communities to get to this level in the country where they're now leading the place?
Well, I think that comes with the caveat of what are elected representatives allowed to speak on. When we look at mainstream media and we look at Parliament, we see that many ethnic minority background representatives are usually only chosen to speak about ethnic minority issues and things that are divisive. And we're not really invited to speak about other matters such as education, policing, and, for instance, economic issues either. So I feel like, we have been put into certain categories where we're only allowed or invited to speak on certain issues. We see that with Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, and the topical issues they speak about is not really general issues within, British politics, but often divisive talking points. So I believe that, yes, while we are seeing a more diverse cabinet, I don't see much diversity in opinions or what we're actually allowed to speak on.
Lee, what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's a complex and nuanced picture. I don't think the strategy of black faces or black and brown faces in high places on itself works. Because although you've increased diversity in the political process, it also comes against the backdrop of the widest gap in racial inequalities that our country's ever seen. And so when you look at particular ethnic minorities, whether that's Southeast Asian Muslims or African or Caribbean descent communities, they have one set of experiences which have seen their level of marginalization deepen and widen. And so that where you have a performative strategy of just simply electing black faces in high places doesn't provide you with the systemic solution to tackling institutionalized racism, which is a much more general and widespread effect. So I think that black faces in high places is a necessary but not a sufficient response to the realities of systemic racism. And I think the challenge is that there were more black people, for all the progress that we've said we'd made, there were more black people elected in elected positions between 1997 and 2010 than there are between 2010 and 2024.
And just for our international audience, the last 14 years have been Conservative rule. So do you think Conservative rule has held back the growth?
What, the growth in equality or the growth in representation?
Representation.
I think that conversely, it's both. Because the Tory party in 2010 selected more people in winnable seats, black and brown people in winnable seats, than any other party. The legacy of that is seen in the way that senior black and brown figures have risen to the most important offices of state within the Tory party. It's an outcome of Cameron's A-list strategy. So it's not one thing or the other, but it happens to be both at the same time, if you sort of take my drift. So it's a rather complex picture, but while black faces and high places may give you the impression that things are moving in the right direction, I think when you look under the hood of that assumption, there are lots of technical race inequality facts and figures that don't bear the reality that high faces might suggest.
Afzal, one thing that struck me about this issue, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, he is an election-winning machine. But if we look at the others, Vaughan Gething, he has been basically pushed into the job. Humza Yousaf up in Scotland, again, taking over from Nicola Sturgeon without an election. And Rishi Sunak only coming into power because the Conservative Party put him in after the disastrous 6 or 7 weeks of Liz Truss. Would any of these leaders win an election, do you think?
Well, I don't see why not. Let's take Sadiq Khan. He clearly has, hasn't he? He's won a number of elections. and we've got to see how the others perform. But there is a party system as well. Ultimately, you've got to get to the top of the party ranking in order to be leading. I can give you my own example. Look, I've served as a councillor, as a Lord Mayor, as a member of European Parliament, as a member of Parliament for Britain's Parliament. But when I was the European member of candidate, I stuck on Nick Griffin. And that's about 6-7 million constituency we're talking about. And we beat him. So I don't think we can say that as a BME leadership position that you don't win. There's a lot of records there. You can see that, yes, we do win. The real is what Lee Jasper was really talking about. I think that's the key. That simply having a black face isn't enough. We've got to be going deeper and saying, what are they really standing for? Are they standing for the policies that the community they are there, for the heritage that they have, or not at all? And I think this is where I find the current government setup. You find these individuals coming out and saying things which actually is alienating to the most of the BME communities. They find it shocking. Whereas I think if you kind of flip that with the Labour Party side, I think while there will maybe individual, but broadly speaking, they will stand up and they will speak out. And they've seen this again and again. I think Gaza is a good example. You know, when the voting came, there was many BME background who stood up and voted, myself included, who resigned. Yet there's hardly anyone standing like that in the Conservative side. So it's those issues that we need to look at, and we've got to look at how do we make sure, as institutionalized ideas, that actually we make progress. And I agree with Lee Jasper again that I think that this has been stepped backward under the Tory government.
Nick Griffin is, of course, the far-right leader in one of the UK far-right parties. Shabnam, I just want to look at a couple of names that came up there from the Conservative side. Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. I mean, they are both from ethnic minority backgrounds, and yet some of what they say in public about policy, about migration, I think a lot of people in communities find very difficult to deal with.
No, I agree with you. And although I am a Conservative and I did set up the Conservative Friends of Afghanistan in 2018, I have served in government with the Minister of Afghan Resettlement, Victoria Atkins, and the Minister of Refugees, Lord Richard Harrington, when the NATO withdrawal happened in Afghanistan and the Ukraine crisis happened. I have seen firsthand how political discourse in the UK can be racially charged at times. And unfortunately, as a result of that, it has meant that we are building stereotypes about certain communities, and policies are not truly being reflective of the communities that we serve. But it's people like myself, we have a duty and a responsibility when we talk about ethnic diversity and ensuring that policies are reflective of the population that we have here in Britain. It's also important to ensure that we're within these parties to help shape the narrative. For me personally, I have been on the front line with attacks over the years of being from a refugee background, and why am I Conservative given the policies that they've introduced.
So why are you Conservative?
Well, I'm Conservative based on, with a small c, on my own lifestyle. I think the majority of refugee backgrounds and ethnic minority communities are Conservative in their way of life. We believe in many of the values that the Conservative Party stands for. But when it comes to policies, we don't sometimes believe that they're truly reflective of who we are and our story and our journey to the UK. For me, it's about shaping that narrative and ensuring that I'm educating and informing the Conservative Party and the MPs that serve us to ensure that who we are and why we're here, and the contribution that refugee communities and ethnic minorities like Rishi Sunak, Vaughan, Leo Varadkar in Wales and so many others have made to Britain and continue to do so.
Halima, how do you feel when you see women like Priti Patel and Suella Braverman using words like swarm and invasion when they're talking about migrants coming to the UK?
Well, I mean, obviously it's quite disturbing, but again, they are just towing the Tory line. But again, as Lee quite said, you know, with the brown face, essentially. And I do think that they enjoy having a long career within politics, and I think that is exactly why they choose to be so divisive. And then, you know, interestingly, with the point that you made about Sadiq Khan, I do not believe that he's an election winner. I think when you ask most people in London, they reluctantly vote Sadiq Khan because the Conservative Party have always put up unelectable, alternatives to Sadiq Khan being a leader. You know, with Zach Goldsmith, Sean Bailey, and then now with Susan Hall. You know, very recently she agreed. She put a post up with when Lawrence Fox likened the LGBT flag to the Nazi symbol. So essentially, the conservative people that they put up against Sadiq Khan are not really electable.
But he can only beat what's put in front of him.
Exactly. So, I mean, that I think, like I said before, most people reluctantly vote Sadiq Khan rather than, they feel like he actually represents London and the interests of London. Most people don't feel like he's actually made any impact, and, people feel less safe, since he's been in power as well.
I just want to come back to Afzal and then I'll come to you, Lee. Afzal, you disagree?
I do. Well, look, first of all, you can't hold Sadiq Khan responsible for the candidate the Conservative Party are putting forward. The fact remains he does win. And I'm pretty confident he's going to win again. And I think overall, he's been a good mayor. But the real issue for me ultimately is when you look at the Conservative Party, let's take Islamophobia. That is number one issue for a Muslim community in the UK. And year after year after year, the Home Office figures tell you that almost half the religious hate crimes are being committed against the Muslim community. They keep promising, never deliver anything. 4 years ago, the government promised that they're going to come up with a definition, ignoring the APPG definition, which all the other political parties accepted. We've been again and again asking them, you hear them then talking about blaming Muslims, all the top leadership, and yet they don't want to do anything about it. So how can we have confidence?
Lee, you've worked for the Mayor of London, you've advised former mayors. Sadiq Khan, is he doing a good job?
I think that, each different devolved authority has got slightly different range of powers. The Mayor of London's was made anemic in terms of the range of powers. Transport, policing, some sort of tangential responsibility for housing, but not quite in control. So he's got the title of being an influencer on certain policy areas, but none of the levers of strategic change or big change. So I think that if you like, the mayoralty as a concept is an undeveloped concept that has not quite reached its full potential. I think in the basis of the areas where he has got responsibility, the one area I would pull him out and up on is his failure to handle the Metropolitan Police Service. I think with the Casey review, with what we've seen in terms of domestic violence against women, of police officers being criminals, of the lack of officers in some areas and so on and so forth, all of that means that the Met has faced an existential crisis. And whilst I agree in some other areas, he's done some good stuff like pumping in money to public health initiatives to tackle serious violence in communities, that's to be applauded. The ULEZ zone, my wife has asthma, and we noticed the difference living near a red route where the air quality is really bad. I can find myself in A&E at 2 o'clock in the morning with somebody who needs respiration support because of the foul toxicity of the air. So there's some areas where you can do. Biggest failure of Metropolitan Police Service, that's an ongoing issue for him. I'm sure he recognises it, but he's going to have to be much more assertive in driving an anti-racist agenda in relation to the Metropolitan Police Service.
Shabnam, if we look across Europe, countries with big established migrant communities, France, Germany, they're years, decades behind the UK in terms of representation, aren't they?
Absolutely. I don't think what we see here in Great Britain, we would ever see, particularly in the next few decades in France, Germany, or any other Scandinavian country across Europe. First of all, we've got to acknowledge that objectively, Britain is very much far ahead in the Western world. What we're discussing here is the fact that we're still far, in terms of proportionality and representation, we've still got a lot to do. But meritocracy has played a big part in the system of Britain's progression around supporting ethnic minorities. I've seen this firsthand. I've worked in government as an advisor. What I'm incredibly proud of here in the UK, and why my family chose the UK, to come to the UK in the first place, is the fact that skill, talent, and sort of attainment and perseverance really does pay off. As long as you can put in the hard work, it is acknowledged and it is recognised. And I think that's one of the reasons we are where we are when it comes to representation across the UK for ethnic minorities. And more importantly, I do want to emphasise, though, that although within the elected space we are seeing more ethnic minorities in leadership positions, we do still have a way to go when it comes to government, all levels of government positions. Unfortunately, I don't think that when it comes to economic equality, healthcare disparities are still disproportionately affecting ethnic minorities, and law and order enforcement is something that, again, is affecting ethnic minorities across the UK. So we've still got a way to go to ensure that, aside from elected positions in government, we have people from, the people that you have here on the panel, all walks of life, ensuring that when we introduce policies, whether it's on immigration, health, or education, or any other policy area, substantial policy area, that our voices are being heard.
I think it's important just to say the overall number of African and Caribbean and Asian people in elected positions is going down, not up. Notwithstanding the relative comparative point, the number is going down, not up. So in previous times, we've had more. I think the other thing to say is there's a huge age challenge here. You can find me, or any of your viewers can point to me, to a single black individual under the age of 30 in an elected position, you'll be doing very, very well indeed. In fact, one of the organisations, Operation Black Vote, that I helped found, did an analysis across the piece, and we could not find a single black person under the age, or black man under the age of 30 elected anywhere in the country.
Wow. Just on the issue of skin colour, Rishi Sunak was asked about this when he took power, and this is what the Prime Minister had to say.
I stand here as our country's first non-white Prime Minister, leading the most diverse government in our country's history, to tell people of all races, all faiths and all backgrounds, it is not the colour of your skin, the God you believe in, or where you were born that will determine your success, but just your own hard work and endeavour.
Halima, Rishi Sunak is adamant that it's all about meritocracy in the UK, hard work and endeavour. Is that your experience?
Well, I'd like to, again, refer back to my co-guest, Afzal Khan, and about Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. So, as former chair of the BME staff network in the Labour Party, one of the issues, again, which, Afzal Khan was a chair of the Labour Muslim Network, was that there's a big issue with rampant Islamophobia within the Labour Party. Now, everybody, I was very pivotal in enforcing that the Ford inquiry is something that happens within the Labour Party on the allegations, specifically on a hierarchy of racism and Islamophobia and anti-black racism, which the Ford inquiry proved that there was a case. I also forced through the definition of Islamophobia and anti-black racism for the Labour Party. And unfortunately, despite how hard I worked, I was shafted out because of those issues. And everybody that submitted anything to do with the Ford inquiry were also pushed out. They no longer work in the Labour Party. So despite how hard we try in the Labour Party to actually, bring forth a positive change, if you're stepping out the boundaries, you're seen as an issue, essentially. So I would like to disagree in Rishi Sunak's statement about meritocracy and, that brown people have to work hard. I see it more as, if you don't toe the line, you're going to get pushed out, essentially.
Racism has increased post-Brexit. So race attacks and race hate have increased by 156% since the referendum. And a large portion of that increase has seen Muslim communities coming under specific attack in relation to immigrations, as well as some Jewish communities. So I think that, although we've had high black faces in high places, that doesn't seem to have improved the situation in terms of race equality and race relations and community safety on the ground in relation to communities' vulnerability to be victims of racial or religious attack. So there's a huge contradiction, and stark contradiction there.
Absolutely. I just want to come back on that. The Labour files did expose that the Labour Party was colluding in the wholesale spying of thousands of members in Newham, and they were seen as infiltrators, essentially. So again, it's one of those things where it's like, if you want to be in politics, you're highly monitored. And I feel like that's the case, in particularly in British politics.
Afzal, what message does it send to young people from a black or Asian minority background when they turn on the TV and they see the news and politicians speaking and they see someone who looks like them? Does that, do you think, inspire young people to think, if he can do it or she can do it, I can do it?
Well, I think it does. I think the role model idea is very powerful. As soon as you see someone of your own background, I have seen this in Manchester, young people saying, oh, yes, we've seen you. That means I can do it as well. But I think I do want to pick a couple of points that have just been discussed. The first one I want to pick up was to do with the policing in London and Sadiq. I think one of the things, as a former policeman myself, one of the things you've got to also understand is the role of the Home Secretary and the cuts in the police officers. If you have cut of 20,000 people, even if you re-recruit them, one of the losses you get is the experience of those experienced police officers. So I think that has to be taken into account. The second thing was said about Labour Party and racism. Look, I did lead that chair, and there was a number of recommendations we made. But the key thing to understand here is that the Labour Party accepted every single recommendation that we came up with, and then almost all of them been implemented. The difference on the other side is they are still in denial that there's an issue when their own figures are telling them that there is a problem. I think that also has to be taken into account. And finally, let me say this about the hard work idea. There is no ifs and buts about the BME community. Broadly speaking, they do work hard. But you know, one of the first Bunny Grant was the MP. And I love something what he said, because my own 25 years experience, what he had said was that as a BME person, you have to work twice as hard to get to the same position and half as wrong to come down. So there are issues there which needs to be challenged.
Shabnam, Halima, Lee and Afzal, thank you all so much for your time today and your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.